welcome to everyone. It's so nice to see you all again on a virtual event. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Aphrodite Gonu, and I'm the Contemporary Art Advisor of the Museum of Cycladic Art. We are so happy to at last be able to say that the museum is open, and you can all visit in real life this show. We will, of course, continue having Zoom events and webinars because they have their own great advantages. Because of the pandemic complications, the one thing we couldn't have tonight is the artist himself with us, Sterling Ruby. But he is at his studio in LA, and we will be having a conversation live with him tonight, and we're super excited about this. So first of all, a big thank you to Sterling Ruby for this beautiful show that he gave us. We are so grateful, and especially for making it happen under these very difficult conditions. It was a leap of faith for all of us. We did not know what the situation would be, whether we would be even able to be open to the public. And at this point, I would like to thank all of the studio, the Sterling Ruby studio, all the staff, for all their help and patience, all the people from the Gagosian Gallery, for supporting the exhibition throughout, and for all their amazing help, especially Dinos Hadzi Rafaelidis, and of course, Christina Papadopoulou, who made it all happen. I will just say a few things about the way the event will go. We will show you first a little video from the show at the Cycladic. Don't play yet. Just 1 second. I will just tell everyone the way things are going to go. We will then, I will then do a little bit of an introduction on the artist. Then you will see a very special thing, a little video from the amazing studio from LA that Sterling Ruby and his studio made for us for tonight. And after we will go around with Sterling, sort of kind of visiting the show together and talking about the show here at the Cycladic. And at the end, we will also show some images from the show at the Gagosian Gallery, and we will give the floor for some questions to Christina Papadopoulou and to a couple of journalists who have been especially invited tonight with you, our friends of the museum and supporters who have supported our contemporary program all this time. And thank you all for being here and for your support. So at this point, I would love to show you all a little video, especially for those who haven't seen the show. I hope you all make it and you see it, but here is a little bit of our show. Sterling. We are again so happy and excited and grateful to have you here with us tonight. I hope you bear with me a little bit while I introduce a little bit your work. A lot of the people who will be with us tonight will know a lot about your work. But for those who might have not seen some of your work or all of your work from previous show, I will just say a few things on your history and biography, okay?
Sounds great. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you.
Sterling Ruby was born in Germany to an American father and Dutch mother and moved at a young age, when he was 8 years old, to the United States, where he grew up on a farm in southeastern Pennsylvania, where he encountered rural communities like Amish and their quilt making and craft, Pennsylvania redware pottery, and other crafts, which inspired his interest in garment making, soft sculpture, and ceramics. He studied at the Pennsylvania College of Art and Design and then went on to study at the Art Institute of Chicago and the Art Center College of Design, Pasadena, California, and has been living for many years in LA. So, of course, several other layers of influences were added on the way. Not only art historical influences, of course, from all his studies, but also the urban landscape, graffiti, hip-hop culture, punk culture, but also the violence that sometimes goes with these urban cityscapes, prisons, issues like globalization, American politics, international politics, issues of waste and consumption. We will talk about all this later in I hope, in more detail. But just generally, I would like to say that Sterling Ruby's work examines the psychological space where individual expression confronts social constraints. Through examining the most marginalized members of society, Ruby seeks to expose the cultural mechanisms of control that underlie contemporary life. Ruby's works often appear scratched, defaced, camouflaged, dirty, or splattered. He uses so many different materials, and this is why we wanted you to see a little bit of the history of the work. But they share a common denominator. His creations seem to come out of an interconnected network and often make direct reference to one another by recycling materials from one series to the other. Common to all of his work is a sustained resistance to ideological limitations of previous art movements like minimalism or conceptual art and high culture. Social practices and legacy which continue to dominate in art, the art system today, even though we will go to that also, things seem to be changing recently there too. He seems to be coming more from the tradition of artists who question these movements like Mike Kelly and Bruce Nauman. He challenges the boundaries of high art and craft to such an extent that he even collaborated with fashion designers like Raf Simons, and recently even produced his own ready-to-wear collection. He is one of the most important contemporary artists of our times. I couldn't even begin to list all the museums where he has shown, participated in exhibitions. I will just say a few: ICA Boston, Nasher, Museum of Modern Art. He's in collections all over the world in museums: LACMA, SF MoMA, MCA, Guggenheim, Whitney, Tate Modern, Pompidou. But before going into my questions about all the work, a few words specifically on the projects at the Museum of Cycladic Art. We invited Sterling Ruby for an intervention at the museum, and specifically the discussion was about exhibiting in the permanent collections, which is something we do very rarely. And only when the museum, and especially our archaeologists, feel that there is a particular meaning to this dialogue. And of course, we all felt that in this case, this was the case. ceramics have been a crucial part of Ruby's artistic career, and we will go more into the influences later. But the one thing that I wanted to mention, because it's part of the work and all his work, is the fact that he combines, alters, and reuses fragments from previous works in a cycle of reincarnation in which transitional moments and images are frozen in time. And I have to quote Roberta Smith, one of the most important art critics from New York Times, because she put it so beautifully. I couldn't put it better, so I'm going to quote from her. That the ceramics combine the scale of sculpture and chromatic richness of painting, but these works also drill into the history and processes of ceramics itself. They encompass loss, violence, the passage of time, the rise and fall of civilizations, the lavishness of ritual, yet they're also funny, indulgent, and outrageous. And they're life-enhancing, elaborating as they do on the most natural and widespread of all mediums. There is no culture in history that has not produced great ceramics. So this was just for everyone to have a little bit of a background for Sterling. And I kind of wanted to start with this work, even though it's not part of our show and even though it's not one of your ceramics, just to go back to the idea of your influences, because obviously a lot of people write about your background and the craft and the rural communities, but you often mention other artists like Tapies or Morandi or Albers. So I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about, before we go into the craft, into what other art movements and interests you had that are part of this work, especially the painting works.
I guess maybe that's a hard one to start off with. I tend to think it might even be impossible to answer, but I tend to think my inspirations are wide. Art historically, I don't tend to have hierarchies based into how I kind of think about what has most influenced me over time. It's certain that I didn't necessarily grow up in a high art household. I grew up in a kind of community that was very hands-on. The community made a lot of things, whether it would be through woodworking or metalworking or sewing or textiles. So that's probably an early kind of influence of mine, is just seeing people make things, really. Later on, when I started to understand art history and ancient civilizations versus modern, kind of movements, I liked the kind of lineage that was kind of thought of through, maybe even what we're kind of going to potentially talk about in regards to the museum. Thinking about how a Spados head from the collection might have influenced somebody like Picasso to Brancusi. I love that these things wind up acting as somehow fodder for people later in history. And, movements can be anything. It can be a conceptual movement, it could be minimalism, it can be abstract expressionism, but it can also be, things that happened way earlier, like early cinema or, early landscape painting. There are many things that I think for me have resonance for influence. Yeah.
Because we often obviously talk about your Amish links, the rural communities that you met there, and their craft making, but also it seems it seems to me, and I think you have mentioned that it has to do also with consumption and waste, and not wasting things and reusing things as opposed to the consumption society that maybe we all live in.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. I think that I grew up in a way that was always kind of identifying with recycling, even though it wasn't the way we might describe recycling now, in a kind of in a context of saving saving ourselves. This was a way that was potentially just more frugal. You didn't waste what you had. But I kind of loved that too later, when I understood this notion of collage, or this notion of kind of upcycling, when things tend to have a kind of essence or an identification of something from the past being reinterpreted into something current or contemporary.
And you mentioned a lot issues of graffiti and the urban landscape and the violence of the urban landscape. Is that something that in a way was it? I can imagine that it must have been quite a big difference, like growing up in a sort of community with other oppressions, I'm sure. I mean, it's
Right.
not like it was idyllic, right? And going to a different kind of freedom and oppression in LA, right?
Yes, without a doubt. I talk about my my kind of upbringing in this community, sometimes in a negative way, but I really had a great childhood. I'm not suggesting anything other than that, but it was an extremely small town, and it was what many people would identify with as middle America. And because of that, there was less exposure to cultures of other places and of other people, and that was kind of reflected on people's attitudes there. And I kind of wanted something else very, very early on. I mean, I can even remember at age 12 just wanting something other than this, and kind of feeling the friction and the kind of aggression of others, because I wanted to be something else, whether that was thinking about gender or whether that was thinking about creativity. I wanted out. And so, I wound up starting to spend most of my time in places like Washington, D.C. or Baltimore, Maryland, cities that weren't necessarily as big as New York or Los Angeles, but, inevitably different than where I was living, much, much different. And I started spending all of my time. Any time that I could spend there, I spent there. And so, like in terms of influence, what we were just speaking about, that was probably my biggest visual and cultural influence, was being able to hone in on a group of people that I identified more with, in those areas, that were either musicians or skateboarders or artists, and that inevitably had an impact on me, later in life, in terms of seeking out bigger ways of, self-expression and kind of cultures, which inevitably wound up becoming, my kind of passion for being an artist and wanting to be an artist for the rest of my life. And coming out to Los Angeles was a really symbolic thing for me, because I still didn't feel comfortable with cities. So New York felt overwhelming in many ways. Los Angeles was closer to the way I grew up. It's a big, sprawling, flat suburb. So it didn't feel as overwhelming. But there was a lot of, there was a lot of things within the city that seemed like psychological studies in a way that could also be used, to kind of express what was happening and hierarchies and different notions of society that I could kind of embed into my artwork. So it's been in California we're like the history of California is short, but we have a really great cultural kind of short term memory, and
Yeah.
like the Grateful Dead say, it's been like a wild trip,
And since we ended up talking about California, and of course we're looking at ceramics, even though these are not from the museum, but they are from your famous series, The Basins. Of course, and going into specifically the ceramics for the moment, as this is the show we have at the museum, I have, it has been mentioned that, of course, you were influenced by the California movement of ceramics, like Peter Voulkos, who's actually of Greek origin, even though he's not Greek. Yeah. Ceramists who actually used ceramics as sculpture as opposed to craft. But you also have said that, in fact, yes, but it was other things that influenced your ceramics also, that it wasn't, it was a little bit of that, but more of other things. Could you?
Without a doubt, I think Voulkos is our greatest contemporary master. It's unfortunate because I think his work has still not been fully recognized the way that
it should.
that it should. That's exactly right. Yeah. Or that that it's somehow comparable to a historical painter, which is just really starting to be kind of recognized and to be contended with in a kind of museum scale or a curatorial scale. When I first started doing ceramics 20 some years ago, I was doing it because it was kind of a conceptual practice. I wanted all of my work to have to do with some sort of psychological lineage. And the ceramics were kind of material for me that alluded to like art therapy and trauma. But after having moved here to California and really kind of understanding how this particular place, and for somebody like Peter Voulkos, it was this kind of turning point in clay where all of the kind of past aspects of utilitarian nature of clay and of ceramics wound up getting turned on its side into this non-utilitarian sculptural object. And, Voulkos was the kind of, instigator of that, and many other artists followed, but it's still never really, ceramics were never considered a high art form. It was always, within the lineage of craft. And I see my generation, and I definitely see younger generations of contemporary artists being fine with ceramics, with, textiles, with film, with, all of these different things. It seems as if these kind of boundaries are starting to finally collapse. And for me, ceramics are like these little mini monuments. You can't control them. They are fired. They are always by chance. You don't necessarily know what you're going to get. And I quite like that because there's still this interpretation of not being able to control it. The basins, the basins are something that hold all of my blown up previous attempts. It's like fragments of time and fragments of history of my work.
And maybe this is a good moment to show your fantastic video of the process, so that we get a feel of how these are done. This is, I think it's a real treat for all of us to see this. You have this amazing studio that I have been hoping to visit one day.
I hope so too. Yeah. So this is my ceramic studio. I moved into a new building, which was a very large building on the outskirts of Los Angeles about 7 years ago. And it was a number of buildings on a large parcel of property. And one of the buildings we just turned into ceramics. So we have 12 kilns that we run every day. And that's not to say there's a lot of things being made, a lot of finished objects being made, but we tend to fire fragments. We tend to, do a lot of glaze studies. We tend to study different type of clay bodies. It's always a kind of process of experimentation, but it's also kind of science in a way, which I love, and the kind of alchemy of it. The vessels and the basins are kind of like ritualized, as if they were like offerings in a vessel, and they can reflect anything. They can reflect a landscape, a river, a lake, or an ocean. I often think of them as like heads or minds thinking about chemistry and how our minds can erode or blossom into these like kind of colorful alchemic formations. And I like thinking of them as mortars, both from the past and, kind of thinking about them from the perspective of something in the future, like a pharmaceutical receptacle or something like that. So this video is really just, we had somebody come to the studio and shoot one day, and this kind of shows what the studio looks like and how I make things, which is not, it's not very tight. It's pretty loose, and that's it.
And I think we get a lot this, which was actually what we wanted everyone to see, this sort of working and reworking of previous maybe broken pieces, or even though we saw quite a bit of you actually making things, not only by chance, but actually made things. And maybe we start looking at, and this is part of our show now, I would say that the three objects at the back are sort of, each one comes out of a series, right? It's one of something you do. You do work in series, but could you tell us a little bit about the originally how these started? Like you said that you were just using found broken pieces from. Kept,
I think that the ceramics didn't start out as thinking of them as fragments or as like ready-mades in a way. I was always interested in clay as a material and the way that it connected to history, the kind of process of kind of malleability and then solidification that happens within the firing process was always kind of really inspirational, to me, and kind of thinking about these like intimate monuments to mark making and to the hand and to history. So what we're seeing now on the screen is the one on the left is a big red mortar, and both of these are made like on a flat table or surface. I tend to, as you saw in the video, I tend to use the outside of our studio quite a good bit. So, all of the clay tends to pick up aggregate. And so you wind up getting this very rough, not only grog within the clay, but also a lot of rock, a lot of stone, a lot of cast offs. Sometimes there'll be pieces of metal that kind of melt through. The one on the left is a mortar. It's this kind of flat hanging ashtray in a way that, to me looks like a topography, almost like, I think this one and in many ways, because they get pressed down into, our asphalt in our yard, they wind up picking up this kind of topography that sometimes makes it look like, the San Andreas fault line or something like that. But yet it's ritualized by having these other recognizable forms within it. And then the one on the right is a pretty new series. I've only been doing this for really since the pandemic. I started making these kind of flowers, and they're very simple. They are, straightforward in what they kind of represent. But I kind of love the open kind of fragility of them, and this kind of excess of kind of mark making and holes that wind up, going into the center of the flower.
And these started during the pandemic. You said this is a series that started during the pandemic.
I did, yeah. I mean, the first 4 months of the pandemic, we kind of shut down the studio. Everybody worked remotely, and I have a very small studio at home with 2 kilns. I share the studio with my 4 kids, so there's not a lot of room to make things. And the other thing that I kind of like is my studio at home is it's not, people aren't necessarily watching over their own work. So if I leave my things out too long, one of my kids are going to take it and kind of turn it into their own. Yeah. And these flowers were just they were like meditations in a way for those first 4 months. My kids and I just made flowers.
And we can also see these beautiful works that you called ballet. And I guess, from what I remember, you have had collaborations with performers, with ballet settings. I mean, is that also a reference to that, or they seem to be found in, I don't know, Pompeii or something,
right,
like ballerinas
right.
in.
It's funny because we did have we had a Pompeii exhibit here in Los Angeles at the Museum of Science and Industry a few years ago, and it wasn't a very big exhibition, but it was it was a number of physical Pompeian figures, and they were so they were so stylized and so formal, but yet they, of course it was like, caught in the action of this this horrific kind of moment. And the ballets also came out of the pandemic. I hadn't really been starting them. Maybe kind of thinking of them in relation to the hearts, which is the third object on the wall. But the ballet, the ballets were kind of all of those things, thinking about these Pompeian figures that I had seen years ago, but also, kind of thinking about all the other works that, came prior to this, like the mortars or the little ceramics or the kind of glazed test vessels, and, kind of reworking those or working those to the point where they break apart and they wound up becoming these kind of spindly, almost, de Kooning-like figurative sculptures. So there's a kind of violence to it. There's a kind of, manipulation to the clay that winds up reading as this kind of displayed, kind of organ type scenario. But it also, because of the kind of the spindly aspect of it, or I think that Aphrodite, you had said something about Giacometti at some point, and Giacometti's like, when you look at those kind of spindly Giacometti sculptures, there's something so delicate and balanced to them that I wanted to kind of make these ballet dancers or ballet figures or kind of just legs that kind of sat there in kind of retribution and kind of influence of all of those things.
And before we go to the other Giacometti works that we will discuss in a minute, as I'm sort of trying to give a little bit the feeling of visiting the exhibition to our audience tonight. I will go to this, which is, of course, we discussed a little bit the basin before, but I kind of wanted to use this work to talk a little bit about the way you talk about archaeology. I mean, one of the interesting parts of having this, inviting you at the museum is, of course, that you have a huge interest in archaeology, but you have also your own meaning of archaeology, like a personal archaeology. So could you tell us a little bit about the basins? And
yeah, I mean, archaeology is archaeology. And I find it, extremely important and interesting. For me, it's like a kind of tracing or a lineage. My archaeology anyway, a lineage from my work as a whole. I like to think of it as a way to put everything together to assess my work and the experiences and the ideas and fragments of materiality. And I think that that's a way that it allows me to move forward with the knowledge and aesthetics of my origins. I think in a way, I like the kind of idea that archaeology is the tracing of civilization and history. And I like this kind of Gothic approach to it, that this notion of digging something up to reassess it and to reanimate it is bringing something back from the dead.
One of the visitors to your exhibition said that looking at this work, they felt that this was like the beginning of life, like the moment that the world, is opening up, something.
That's
like
a nice
life.
comment. Thank you.
Life is kind of coming out of this object.
Thank you. That's a good one.
At this point, I will use something that our director, archaeologist, Professor Stambolidis found for us, and I think we have shown it to you, which is interesting because he basically looked at your work and he said, oh my God, this so reminds me of this object, and of course none of us knew what this object was, and I'm sure you probably hadn't seen this object, right? So it kind of felt like it comes out of this kind of, collective conscience that we felt this. So this, I will say a few words because I asked. Of course, I didn't know. Apparently, these are like a little clay miniature maquette of a house with people. And apparently, it was used maybe as a votive when they were building a house, like in the foundations of a house. So what did you think when we sent you this object? We have one more.
I couldn't believe this.
Yeah.
And the dove vase that you had sent me was such amazing. For me, it's the kind of ritual of seeing this. I had never seen it before, but this notion that this is like something that was stuck under the foundation of the house, to kind of keep the house in check in terms of this offering. It's amazing. I don't know what to say.
We were all quite amazed to see these, and of course now we go into, and I must say we love this. As I said, it's very rare that we have contemporary art in the main collection, in the permanent collections. I hope everyone gets to see it. It works so beautifully in the Cycladic works, and I will start with this one, as we talked about Giacometti before. This is one of your clubs, and we will show the other clubs. Some of the clubs are horizontal, some are vertical, but this specific club again came out of your dialogue with Professor Stambolidis, who felt it would be amazing to also look at it in dialogue with our standing Cycladic figurines, and specifically the one that we can't see very well here, but I hope I have a picture of it later on. You call them clubs, but they do have a very anthropomorphic feel to us, especially in this context. I mean, how does this work fit into the rest of the ceramics? Is it a different?
Well, yeah. I mean, you know, the basins are so. The basins, you know, even the works on the wall wind up being so bottom heavy, or, you know, kind of mounted. You know, there's such a kind of volume of either hitting the ground or hitting the wall, and the clubs for me are really about these kind of, again, these very spindly. I kind of like, you know, gravity defying. You know, I like the fragility of artifacts. And again, this is a way of thinking about an item or an object that once in time held immense utilitarian use, but now after all of these years winds up as this kind of delicate artifact of a past time in a museum, a past way of life, a past when things were slower, tougher, more labor related. And, you know, I like to think that these kind of standing club sculptures defy gravity in a way. They're meant to look as if in total balance, and to reflect that kind of split in between the ancient utilitarian and the modern contemplative, you know, monumental. I've always kind of thought that these things were supposed to be like intermediary objects from, you know, the past and the future in a way. But that's also, you know, I liked all of the diagrams and the aspects of that the professor had sent, because, you know, really, you know, this past that we're talking about in relation to when things had use value. And then when we're looking back at it after so much time, you know, they become these kind of aesthetic objects. They're fragile, you know, they're you know, not to be touched anymore.
They're not.
And I kind of love that. I love that idea that that's when it becomes, you know, a bygone era.
And next to, I mean, this is another, maybe you can see a little bit more, but I wanted to get, these are also called clubs. So the horizontal clubs and the vertical ones obviously refer to a tool, even though the horizontal ones to us felt very anthropomorphic in this context.
Right.
But these seem to be less, maybe they have less of an element of chance, and they're sort of more made sculptures. I'm not sure if this is, were these made with the intention of looking like an old tool that is not that is now fragile, and I'm going to show a close-up of these very beautiful objects, and then this was the surprise that we sent you again. I mean, this is the stone part is ancient, and the wooden part is they sort of made them to see the way. Yeah, they would have been, because they would have been made of wood. So yeah, looking at these clubs in the Cycladic permanent collection has been pretty amazing, because of course they're very fragile and very beautiful objects, and they're not at all something to work with.
Well, I think that's, you know, this almost the presentation, the museumology of how things are displayed are also very interesting to me. And you're right, you know, the clubs, and then these front two kind of canine, feline, you know, kind of paws almost. You know, they did come out of other works, you know, whether it would just be a a kind of fragment of something that I pushed to the side. And these were done prior to the freestanding club. So, I started propping them up on these little, on these little rocks or these like small stones or these small, like rough ceramic plinths, just to kind of give them some space. And then over time, just looking at them and technically trying to figure out how to do it, because we have to fire the clubs a few times. They can't just be fired once. So, they start firing flat, and then when they get glazed, we prop them up with a little metal armature in the kiln, and they're fired, vertical. So, there's all of these different premises of the way artworks get looked at. And I don't just think of this in relation to clay. It could also be painting or collage or textiles. And that's a kind of art historical scenario of looking at things from above, working on things on the ground, working on things on the wall, the kind of gravity of how artworks wind up, kind of pulling from in terms of the way that they were made versus the way that they're presented.
And how, they take different sort of meanings, right, in different... So like this one, which I'm sure... I'm going to go back to the other. I think I told you before, that was one of my favorite installations in the museum, because I'm sure it takes a very different meaning to me when I saw it in the museum, because it suddenly looked to me like the helmet of a warrior or the hair of a sculpture. And then I read bonnet is a title, and of course it probably refers to the little hats that women wear, Amish women, I don't know, you tell us if that's it. And then maybe the middle part is a brick, which is kind of sort of labor manly symbol. So I don't know whether that, whether to you it looks different here, whether it was made with a different idea, or how it changed for you inside the museum.
The bonnets, are also a relatively new series. I did, a number of other forms that were really just draped over something during the firing, so it kind of held this shape. And without a doubt, I thought helmets. Without a doubt, I thought hair. But I also thought about my upbringing, and also within fashion, kind of looking back at things that were utilitarian, and the bonnet is, for me, one of the most historical, particularly heavy American type of garb or kind of like garment. And, I kind of loved that all these things kind of like held capacity for that in this one little object. The bonnets are kind of these draped forms that take on these symbolic references, like you said. But I like that the firing allows me to have this kind of like hollow draped form that can be propped up with this kind of rectangular and geometric brick. And the brick is actually a kiln firing brick. So these are bricks that we use to build shelves in the kiln. And you buy them pre-made, they're pre-fired, and they can be glazed, they can be, and it's just been recently that I started using the bricks that are really to build the shelves that weren't ever necessarily meant to be sculptures I just started embedding them into the sculptures, because I love the kind of dynamic of these kind of square, rectangular, geometric forms kind of holding up and propping up this kind of anthropomorphic form. And the placement of the forms on top and on the bottom of one another echo the museum-like quality that suggests the head or whoever wore it is gone, is no longer in existence.
I think at this point, yes, I have to go on to your other show also, and maybe when because we wanted to show everyone some of your paintings from your concurrent show at Gagosian Gallery. First of all, because I think it's amazing for the Athenian public to see both series of your works, because of course we don't have the paintings here at the museum, and also just to ask whether, I mean, we have discussed before that you have been in Greece before, you've had a show in Greece before, if I may say, at Bernier Gallery. And I had seen that show. You knew of our museum, you knew of Athens. I think you were thinking about all those things for many years. But when you knew that these exhibitions were going to happen at the same time, I don't know, is there any link between them? Are they completely not linked? Do they have to do with the specific spaces, with Athens, with, I don't know. If
I mean, for me, I've been to Athens a couple of times, and each time it's solidified with me. It's one of my favorite cities in the world. I would say, my two favorite cities in Europe are Athens and Rome. And the couple of times that I've been to Athens, I've spent days just walking. The Acropolis in and of itself is it's something that we don't have in the States. We don't have that age of anything. The very first time I was there, I was just so awe-inspired by the the time, and the beauty of how connected to time the place makes me feel. Athens being Europe's oldest city and the first to establish democracy also has resonance within it. But, it really, those weeks that I was there, I kind of loved starting out at the Acropolis, and then walking down and kind of seeing all these kind of fragments of marble that over time have kind of, been displaced and kind of are now, haphazardly and kind of almost, intimately dropped into these areas that are now overgrown with grasses or flowers or olive trees. There's something extremely romantic to all of that. But I found formal beauty in it as well. And so, when Christina and I started talking about doing the show, it was about Athens. It was about Greece, and it was about the kind of things that over, my kind of autobiographical time thinking about Athens and Greece came to push and pull in relation to the landscape of it, the history of it, but also, kind of bringing in Shakespeare's, A Midsummer Night's Dream play, thinking about, sexuality and dualities within, the play and how these particular characters and these kind of locations and, different variations of interpretations of Greece and Athens and the kind of myths of it, kind of point to, outer inner body experiences in a way. So, the Cycladic show I wanted to do for many, many years. And that was kind of, somebody presented the possibility to me. I mean, this was probably 10 years ago or something like that. And I was completely intrigued by it then. It just took a little longer to
materialize.
To do it.
I must say, we feel really, really privileged to have not only the show at the museum, of course we are so so grateful for that. But also to have the other show in Athens, I think it's fantastic for the audience in Athens to be able to see both these beautiful shows. And at this point, I would like to invite also Christina, who would like to ask a few questions. Hello, Christina.
Hi,
and
Christina.
who, of course, helped us throughout this whole endeavor to make it happen during the pandemic and all kinds of other. Hi, Christina.
Hello, thank you, Aphrodite. First of all, I would like to thank Sterling for this incredible exhibition he gave us for Athens, and it was specially made for Athens and the gallery. This is the gallery's second exhibition after we opened the new space in September, and I'm really honored to present it. We have discussed and decided to do this show back in February in 2020 when it was in your studio in LA. I think this was my last trip before pandemic. So it was a very different world. You spoke a bit about the idea behind the exhibition and Shakespeare's Midsummer Night Dream. The show includes mostly new paintings from your window series and a few ceramics. Since we haven't spoken much about your paintings, maybe you'd like to speak to us a bit about this body of works. And also I'd be interested to know if, because you worked on this exhibition during the pandemic and in very different and quarantine conditions. And I was wondering, if this changed at all your idea or your process or anything,
No, without a doubt. Everything became more difficult, during the pandemic for everybody. It was a real saving grace for me to be able to work on these two shows at the same time. Because I'm somebody who, I need to keep working. I don't take well to idleness. It kind of sounds like a bit of a Shakespearean thing. So we established doing the show at the new gallery in Athens, and, as the space still hadn't been finished, images would trickle in here and there. And, the space is just such a beautiful space. These small round archways and predominantly white with these black frame windows. And, these paintings, although I've done a few other exhibitions with the window paintings, they're still relatively new to me. And what they are is these kind of painterly experiments for me, where it's a relatively rough, raw ground, maybe sometimes with a tint or a color or an overdye. They're oil paint, very thick, but they have this kind of fragment of cardboard and textile and kind of ephemera from other areas of the studio, stripped down the center, and then this kind of small base at the bottom is this kind of foundation. And I call them window paintings because I like the kind of illusion that you're not necessarily conceptually sure if you're looking into it or looking through something. So it's this kind of outside, inside, outside dilemma. But formally, I also like that when there's a small portion of paint on a piece of cardboard, it looks completely different than it does when that same, small, aspect of paint is on canvas. And so you get these dualities and different types of scenarios of how paintings are made and what things look like as paintings, and then they're kind of collaged together. So, for me, they are kind of embracing not only painting and different types of mark making, but also, my first and foremost influence, which is collage. And, the two ceramic sculptures in the exhibition, we felt were necessary to kind of directly link, the Cycladic exhibition with the gallery exhibition. And the basin that's in the gallery show is based off of the Acheron, so the river that takes the dead to Hades. And for me, that was kind of thinking about this very basic play that everybody knows of Shakespeare's. It wasn't, I didn't necessarily come from a very cultural background. I never read Shakespeare in middle school or high school. My kids are all like weirdly reading Shakespeare in late middle school, now. But it was a play that I really loved. And when we decided to do this exhibition, all of these things started to come together. And it was a great way for me to kind of really kind of hole up in this massive studio of mine by myself and kind of make this work, which is, we're here in California, we're a little bit back to basics. I have a pretty large team. The studio is big, so I'm watching people walk by now. But when I was really deep in thought and making this exhibition, it was a very lonely, kind of time in the studio for me. And I got to think about these things formally. I got to think about these things contextually and theoretically, but also just kind of thinking about colors too, which is something I guess I always do, but I don't necessarily always, I'm not so aware of it or so conscious of it. So even the colors, I wound up, thinking about these palettes of colors that were predominantly spring-based, and thinking about when we were going to do the show and thinking about the context of when it takes place in A Midsummer Night's Dream. And so there's night paintings, there's morning paintings, but everything kind of has this kind of lock into Athenian spring.
What's incredible about the show is that when we first installed it, it looked like it's in great dialogue with the building and with the architecture of the building, and even landscape outside of many windows. So
yeah, it was such a fun show to put together because we were receiving diagrams of the space and photos of the space. And Bryce Martin had a beautiful exhibition before me. He's an artist that I really, really love. And, so I was just constantly looking at his exhibition and thinking, oh my gosh, how do I make a show this beautiful? And, we started taping off the floor plan because we do that in the studio. We tape off rooms and staircases, and then where there's a window, we print out a photo of the window. And so it wasn't the same. I knew it wasn't the same, but we tried to reenact being in the space as much as we could.
It felt that way as it felt.
If I may say, I saw the exhibition the first time when the tree also was blossoming outside the gallery with the purple colors that unfortunately we can't see anymore. And it really felt like everything was perfectly orchestrated for Athenian spring.
One of the times that I was in Athens was during spring, and it was just so, all the kind of like yellow flowers and the kind of pinks and beautiful, bright, neon greens. And, it was just a really, really beautiful place to be in the spring.
At this point, and before I go to the specially invited journalists who might want to ask a question, I think our president, Sandra Marinopoulos, would like to come in. She's We're waiting to her to come online.
Hi, Sterling. Can you hear me?
Hi, Sandra. Yes, I can. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. So I was very moved because you said 10 years ago somebody had mentioned the Cycladic Museum.
Yes.
And
yes.
I just want to say that in November of 2011, my husband and I came to visit your studio with Tate Modern on a trip to
With
LA.
Jessica, yes, yes.
With Jessica.
Say the word, Jessica, yes.
Amazing experience with Jessica Morgan. And since then, you know, we've been following your work, and we always wanted you to come to Greece, and here we are today. So that's all I wanted to say.
I just I need to come though. That's the problem.
Yes. So we look forward to meeting you once after 10 years.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity. It's really an honor. Yeah.
All the best.
Thank you.
And
thanks, Sandra.
to have you in Athens at the museum, we hope to see you.
I hope so too. I mean, that's one of the.
It will.
It's been difficult for everybody.
I know.
Not to know when things were going to open up, or you know.
I know. I know we've run a little bit late, so I don't know if any of our lovely invited journalists would like to ask a question. If anyone would like to ask a question, they can raise their hand, or no?
Maybe we covered it all.
Yeah. Or anyone. If not, then we can also, yeah. Okay, maybe not. Maybe one question from the audience, if there is one, or shall we wrap it up? No? Okay, I think they tell me that we have run.
It's early here for us, but I understand it's not so much.
Maybe I want to ask.
Sorry, someone said something.
It's
hi.
In addition. Hi, Sterling. Thank you very much for both. I mean, thank you, the museum and Christina and everybody. I just wanted to ask, I really stuck in my head when you said you were speaking about the ceramics, and you said that they're little monuments that we cannot control. And this kind of expression kind of stuck with me in the sense, like, in a way that a monument we cannot control its meaning because it's public, or can you go into detail into that, or was it a bit of a poetic expression?
I think maybe a couple of different ways. Both. Personally, for me, when I make these works, I'm thinking about how malleable the clay is when I'm working with it. And then it goes through this kind of firing process, which solidifies it. It hardens it. It puts it in a state of this kind of frozen gesture in a way. And I remember, 20 some years ago, most of my, kind of experiences with artists that were a little bit older than me were very, they're very conceptual. They were very minimal. They were very hands-off. And there was this kind of, period of contemporary art where, everybody was kind of either having their work fabricated, or kind of referring to kind of minimalist notions of distance, no autobiography, no lineage of the hand, distance. And when I started working with ceramics, it as I had said before, it was kind of like this psychology, like wanting to like work with the same material that art therapists work with, patients and so forth, as if that was the concept. But over time, it made me realize that I was working with my hands. That's how I grew up. I was an artist of a different generation. I wasn't my teachers. I wasn't the artist that was born 10 years prior to me. I was thinking about different things, and I really wanted to go back to, over the course of those 20 years of working with ceramics, I started to understand that this was like my small monumentalization of this kind of like process for me, where I was harking back to a time when artists were working in studios with their hands, with material, thinking about material, thinking about making things, just, this kind of, emphasis or innate necessity to make something, But, when I started thinking about them as monuments that way, it also became this kind of way for me to kind of think about monuments on a much bigger global scale. And, the idea of the monument right now, particularly in the United States, is we have a lot of debates about monuments and monuments, the way, they were placed in areas throughout the United States without thinking about, the kind of context of it, for the future. And I think that's something that we're contending with on a very, very big, kind of U.S. scale. And some people are completely opposed to erasing any sort of identity if it had happened in the past, and, keeping these kind of monuments up. And then other people want to abolish them and tear them down, and to, kind of treat that as the kind of reaction to a time that, was at odds with where we are now. So I kind of love the monuments it's so tough. Like, the idea of a monument is really tough. So I've always liked, I've always thought it's absolutely necessary as an artist to kind of make yourself vulnerable. So these kind of ideas of monuments are like, almost like my vulnerability. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. We're waiting for you in Greece, because there's a lot of things to discuss.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Sterling. It has been so generous of you, not only to have 2 shows in Athens, but also to have you here tonight with us. I have a list of another 35 questions, but I think we will exhaust you and the audience. We hope to have you at some point in Athens, maybe have a live discussion. It has been really amazing, and not only the perfect collaboration, but the fact that this show, I think, will stay with us for a long time, and lots of things to think about. Our archaeologists thought of new things. We thought of new things because of our archaeologists. I think it always makes such an interesting encounter when we put contemporary art.
I know, that's a conversation in and of itself. I mean, I have like everything you sent me in front of me. I have all of my notes. I mean, this is like really, let's I mean, this one in particular. This
one in particular, I know, for all of us. So yeah, we hope to continue thinking about all this and discussing it. And thank you, everyone, for participating tonight, for your support to the museum and to the contemporary program. And most of all, thank you, Sterling, for this fantastic, generous contribution tonight.
Thank you, Aphrodite. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. It's been a real honor.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Good night.